Hi, everybody.
So Giulio, very quickly, so Giulio's working at Bayer AG and his talk is about, sorry, I think in view of time, I will skip through. You can see his biography on the link on the program anyway, but he's going to talk to us about open source chromatographic data analysis for reaction optimization and screening. So I'm sure there's a lot about here on data management. When you're ready, Giulio, please.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks everybody for giving me the opportunity to speak about the work that we've been doing in a small team within Bayer as a collaboration with the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, which goes directly into a lot of the questions and the concern that had been raised yesterday and today. It's like, how do we deal with our data and how do we extract the maximum amount of information and knowledge out of our data? And we also were trying to answer this question, and I would like to show you how are we going to address this, how did we do it until now, and how will we do it in future, continuing with this work that we started. So today I would like to present you where we came from, why we started this project, and what we developed as a result of it. The Python package that we developed is called MOCCA, and you will learn all about it through 3 case studies in the next 20 minutes or so. This is what we really wanted to achieve with our project. We wanted to open up our data, and we wanted to open up our analysis for whatever use case that we thought was important. Through different work in the company, we've seen that sometimes the insights that we would like to generate are impossible in retrospect because the data that we would have needed at the beginning wasn't correctly acquired to begin with. We either didn't have the possibility to do so, or we simply didn't have the way to structure it properly and extract it in order to gain insight out of it. And it is definitely true that this type of considerations can apply to each part of the discovery cycle that we perform in chemistry, right? If you don't translate your experimental design, your idea properly into a procedure and don't specify exactly what your addition time should be, what your temperature of the jacket or your temperature inside the reaction should be, your steering speed or shape of the steerer should be, of course, there is a lot of possible failure points and uncertainty points. But what we really saw is that there is one part of this cycle that was until now overlooked. So I think we have seen a lot in the past few days and earlier today that you have to start with an experimental design, translate it into procedure, then of course execute the experiment either manually or with automated systems, as we have seen earlier. We always have to transfer our sample in a reproducible manner, in a way that is actually representative of our sample, monophasic, biphasic, slurry sampling. We have to prepare our sample ready for our chemical analysis. We have to acquire the data of our analysis. I would say 90% of the data we acquire is done by HPLC. And we have to process this data and analyze and understand what actually happened in our reactions. And usually our data is processed until now in software that is shipped out with the analytical instrument. If you use ChemStation, you use Lab Solutions, you use Empower, and so you are quite dependent on the type of instrumentation that you have and the type of possibilities that you have downstream, being processing methods, being the way the data is stored, the way it is transported to be visualized with other tools, and we saw a great opportunity to improve on this matter. And so this is what we focused in our team. We wanted to enable database decisions by overcoming proprietary data formats and data analysis algorithms, especially by using HPLC data to generate actionable insights. And what this revolves around is getting our data acquired by an HPLC into an open raw data file. And here you can actually see a graph that is generated by unpacking raw HPLC data using the allotrope data format, which we'll hear a bit more about later. And so once you have found ways, and we have found several ways of exporting this data, some are natively implemented in vendor software, some require some custom scripting, you actually have all the possibilities of MOCCA, which stands for Multivariate Online Contextual Chromatographic Analysis, at your disposal. Why? Because MOCCA is a package that takes advantage of the full library that Python, as the most used language in data science, uses for data analysis. And what that allows you to is to build custom reports, extract relevant information, produce the information, and publish it in a way that allows you to, first of all, cut down on the time you need to analyze reactions and the data, and generate insightful decision for the next step that you're doing within your workflow. How does MOCCA look like? What does it contain? What does it not contain? It is structured around 3 layers of complexity and information aggregation. So we start with a data level, then we move to information, and then ultimately out of information we generate knowledge. What does this look like in a more specific case? You have to have a way of processing your diode array data that comes out of a standard HPLC with a PDA or diode array detector. And this features classical mathematical operations such as baseline correction, peak picking, peak expansion, integration, purity checks, and also deconvolution of impure peaks that we will hear about later on, which is really the key feature of MOCCA that enables us to do things that we would normally not really be able to do using standard vendor software. Then if we go one layer above, we start to aggregate this data. So we have several of these single traces and start thinking about how do we interface this data with each other by assigning peaks, by maybe quantifying each peak, because in parallel we have run calibration curves for specific known compounds. We can track compounds across the chromatogram. We can handle external standard. We can also generate a library of compounds, of general retention times, of UV chromatogram that belong to each compound, which aids the recognition of them. And ultimately, you can control the level of knowledge that you generate out of it by generating custom reports. So here, for example, this one is a screenshot out of a custom report that is generated out of MOCCA that uses a package called Data Pane, which visualizes data based on Altair visualization library. And you can see that each peak that is labeled as pure is highlighted in green. Each peak that has some overlap and triggered some deconvolution is highlighted in red. You see a peak table of retention time, and this is all fully automated and available within your Python console or Jupyter Lab notebook. And I would like to talk now a bit more about the deconvolution of impure peaks. And this is especially important for all types of parallel reaction screening and optimization that you do, where you have a semi-standardized workflow that aims to capture most of the chemistry that you're about to do in your lab or in your automated platform. What this usually means is that you have 1 or 2 standard methods to analyze your reaction outcome. And you can, of course, augment your resolution using UHPLC methods with very small particle size columns, high pressure. But of course, this type of equipment also is a bit more prone to failures, clogging, and so on. And so what we've observed very often is that you are faced with an information paradox where your method is not perfect to resolve all the peaks that you find, in your chromatographic run. You, of course, don't know which peaks you will find, but in order to develop a method that is able to resolve this, you beforehand need to know all the peaks that you're actually expecting. And so how do you deal with the classic example where your product peak may overlap or have a shoulder with something that is unwanted or unexpected? And this is very important when you start thinking about doing arrays of reactions, 96 well plates, where you may not manually be able to look over each of these type of peaks, and your data analysis software makes you quite dependent on its capabilities in order to extract relevant information. And so for this, we set out to verify and validate the type of algorithms for peak deconvolution that we put into MOCCA. So in doing this, we selected one standard column and created 5 HPLC methods in which we just varied the gradient length. So you have a standard HPLC method that goes either 2.5 minutes, 1.5 minutes, 1, 0.75, 0.5 minutes. And of course, what this induces as the method gets shorter and shorter, it induces more compression within the chromatogram, more peak overlap. And we just wanted to stress test our peak deconvolution algorithm on a standard well-known reaction, this Knovel-Agel condensation of a series of aldehydes with malonodinitrile, in which you have para-substituted benzaldehydes that react in methanol with a base catalyst to give this alpha beta unsaturated compound. And so how this looks like here again, reports generated by MOCCA is that if you have a two-component mixture as a competition experiment with malononitrile, you see the two products form in different ratios. And in this case, they are baseline separated as indicated by the green highlight. As soon as you start reducing the gradient length, you start seeing overlap, which in this is nearly baseline separated, and in this case, extreme overlap. But the software is still able to correctly assign the maximum level of where the peak would be, and also deconvolute both the retention time of the pure peak as well as the UV spectrum of the single components. And we can also do this with the same type of reaction, now with the 3 component, where the spectra get more and more complex. And we've done extensive benchmarking also with simulated types of peaks, retention times, and UV spectra. And with this, we were confident enough to say, okay, let's test this. Let's see how this looks like. You can see that in this experiment, in which we ran this type of reaction in HPLC vials and sampled each HPLC vial at specific time points by measuring with a specific gradient, we could see acceptable, pretty good correlation with 2 analytes as well as 3 analytes. And certainly, this is not an extremely high correlation, but given the type of goal that we set out of for screening and optimization in a laboratory setting, so no quality control, extremely fine optimization, this was extremely nice to see that we were able to deconvolute these peaks with something where you would say, as a human, you would already go and develop an ad hoc method for this specific problem. Then we went one step further, having proven that we can validate peak deconvolution and deal with unexpected compounds that may overlap with our desired peaks. And we set out to study a Wellplate reaction that we were interested in and analyze it with MOCCA. And the reaction in question was based on reactions that we did as a company in the past. So my colleague Nick Guimont published on palladium and nickel catalyzed cyanation starting from aryl chloride and using acetone cyanohydrin in an alcoholic solvent to produce benzonitriles. And as many of you know, the cyanations especially palladium catalyzed ones are tricky reactions to run because free cyanide is an extremely good ligand for palladium and can completely kill your catalytic system. So it's important to always keep the concentration of free cyanide low and create high enough turnover that this concentration is so low because it's either added slowly to the reaction mixture, which was achieved by slow addition of the cyanide, acetone cyanohydrin via syringe pump, or it is consumed at such a rate that forms the benzonitrile in a way to keep the system catalytically competent for the time of the reaction. And here we went one step further and thought, why not avoid the slow addition by designing a cyano donor, which by virtue of the alcoholic solvent and the base that we need to employ anyway in the reaction conditions, would slowly release cyanide and thus make it available to the reaction by deprotecting the protected cyanohydrin, releasing cyanohydrin, which collapses and forms acetone and cyanide that can then be coupled directly. And for this, our postdoc Max Liebesmeyer synthesized several protected cyanohydrins, some with more bulk here, some with different electronics on the protecting group part, and we set out to screen several bases. In this case, we took 4 bases of varying strengths and ligands that we knew were probably going to give some sort of conversions because they've been proven to be competent in these type of cyanations or are just general types of ligands. And with this, we had our parameter space for our 96 Wellplate screening assembled. We performed also some studies beforehand to assess the potential of these different cyanohydrins to actually survive the reaction conditions, because as you can imagine, different protecting groups may or may not be stable to the reaction conditions. And as you can see here, just a controlled experiment in which we mixed the DMAP, dimethylaminopyridine, and N-butanol at 100 degrees with the different cyanohydrins leads to markedly different decomposition rates and cyanide release rates, in which, for example, 10E, the acetate here, is extremely quickly to decompose, whereas with the stronger base, so in this case TMG and butanol at 20 degrees, we saw a more homogeneous profile, and in this case 10F, right, the bulky carbamate, is actually the quickest one to decompose. So this is, of course, not immediately clear just by looking at the structure. And so it's important to be able to run these experiments in parallel efficiently and analyze the data efficiently. And as many of you can maybe tell by the way this is plotted, this is also done and plotted with MOCCA and then plotted through Jupyter Lab. And so by having our cyanide sources in hand and a general idea of what type of plate we wanted to run, we set out to run this reaction. And within a few lines of code, you can generate these types of plots in which you can clearly see that there is some hotspot of reactivity with the DMAP and XPhos catalytic system with 3 cyanide sources, whereas 10B, the TMS protected cyanides, is almost completely incompetent in generating product. These are all calibrated yields against internal standard, and you can see that 10G with the trifluoroacetate gave no product in each of these types of reactions. We can go one step further with MOCCA because we have the full data analyzed, the full chromatogram, the full UV spectrum, and can also track, besides our known product that in this case we knew and we had reference against, something that the software called unknown 3. And unknown 3 appeared mainly in two rows, 10A and 10D. And for those skilled in the art, you may already have an idea of what this is. It was easy to imagine that you have the deprotection of the cyanosource by butanol, plucks off the benzoate, and creates butyl benzoic acid, which is picked up as unknown 3 by our software. And doing this within a matter of seconds actually helps you identify hidden trends that you may not be able to see by looking through chromatograms one after the other in a manual way, keeping in mind that human can only process about 5 types of categories and persist them in their memory at any given time. So that's about 5 chromatograms with maybe about 10, 15 different retention times, and then it's over. And moving on to the next type of study that we did to test our software was how could we really integrate this in a fully autonomous decision-making process. So by taking the information that MOCCA provides and feeding it into an algorithm that would, based on this information that is fed to it, generate a new experimental design to optimize a reaction. And through our partnership with MIT, we had access to a microfluidic droplet platform, which has been developed in 2018 by the Jensen Group. And this platform is able, through the liquid handler and a series of syringe pumps and an oscillating droplet reactor, to set up reactions with a variety of liquid reagents and run the reaction by residing this reaction within the droplet reactor that oscillates back and forth, then quench the reaction, analyze it. And we've done several improvements to the original design of this reaction by introducing a nanoliter injection valve, which can cope with high amount of organic solvents, so DMF, DMSO, toluene, and not lead to breakthrough within the columns. We now have automated HPLC raw data export thanks to MOCCA and are out of CSV and Excel hell. And we have integrated EDBO as a Bayesian optimizer that we've heard yesterday about to optimize our reactions and translate the outcome of this to our control program, which is written in LabVIEW. For this study, we have chosen a smaller parameter space that is still significant and not trivial to optimize. So in this case, we have decided to focus on the alkylation of 2-pyridone with butyl iodide in presence of 3 different bases or 3 different solvents, and screen the 2 categorical variables, base and solvent, as well as 2 continuous variables in this time, in this instance, temperature between 35 and 100 degrees, and residence time, so reaction time between 10 and 60 minutes. And what you can see here in this plot is our EDBO workflow, which is built on the information that MOCCA generates, in which you can see an experiment number 2. We reach 30% yield with DBU as a base at a temperature of 100 degrees and a reaction time of 60 minutes. And here you can a bit see also the curiosity of the EDBO algorithm that tends to explore the edges of this parameter space. So either one extreme of the temperature or another extreme of the temperature, nothing in between really, as well as the reaction time, something very long within the bounds or very short within the bounds. And we could see by running this uninterrupted that the best conditions were identified with toluene as a solvent and DBU as a base. And this is interesting because this type of outcome is not immediately obvious if you look at the actual chromatograms that were collected overnight. Because what you can see here is that our desired product has a pretty significant overlap with a byproduct here, we term it 8, which turns out to be alkylated DBU. And so this can, under normal circumstances, generate a systemic bias in the yield calculation for your type of autonomous optimization workflow. And these yields are normalized because the peak can be successfully deconvoluted in an automated way by using MOCCA. And we were able to verify this, that these were actually the best reaction conditions with a scale-out experiment in which we performed the reaction in small vials. And you can see here the same conditions. DBU toluene gave 63% yield, so slightly higher yield compared to the droplet system, but the trend was pretty much the same. And to conclude, I would like to just mention our path forward for this project. So we have decided to publish MOCCA open source with an MIT license, and so you can install it and play around with it by just hitting pip install MOCCA in your console. We are in the process of publishing this. It's currently uploaded as a preprint on ChemArchive, and we hope to inspire open source spirit and establish a user base and create a community, not only around MOCCA, but also around automation for chemical reaction optimization, for synthesis. And this is why also MOCCA comes with a disclaimer that it's not production ready. It is usable, but definitely it's not, doesn't have the quality that we would expect from something we normally would buy and pay a hefty license fee for. And so what's next for MOCCA? We are very committed to fair data principles. This is why we have from the very start designed the allotrope as a fair data framework for using our HPLC data. We want to work with Python, with JupyterLab, with these type of data analysis and data science toolkits, which have a broad user base in order to fuel further developments and really democratize the type of work that we do, and make it more accessible, not only to our partners within industry, but also to academia. So we get young people more and more involved into thinking about chemistry with a digital mindset. And last slide, I would really like to thank our whole team that created this project. This project started as a life science collaboration program, which is an innovation program within our Bayer corporate innovation. So we work together with people from our crop science division or pharmaceutical divisions, a lot of people within the company, from data scientists to chemists to analytical chemists. And this is driven by our postdocs, Christian and Max, who spent a year at MIT and a year in my lab. And we wouldn't be able to work with this without the help of the group of Klaus Jensen and Edward, who have been instrumental in creating MOCCA, as well as our partners, Adiro, which helped us putting together the droplet platform, as well as Ostus, who's helping us creating a user interface for MOCCA so that everybody will be able to use it in a standard chemistry lab without having to learn any type of programming. And with this, I would like to thank all of you for your attention and answer any questions.
Thank you really very much, Giulio. I really enjoyed that. So the floor again is open. There's a couple of questions already. So the first one is from Nessa. Do you think there are advantages of allotrope compared to other data standards? And are you guys already using that as your standard?
So we are not yet using allotrope as a data standard across the company, but there is, so what we're really looking at here is as allotrope is the standard because it was the closest that is accessible to us. Because we knew that it was a highly compressed format that was in principle enabling different type of data, not only HPLC raw data, to be stored within itself, and it has the ability to handle metadata. So what type of reaction conditions you actually have in your data. And so pretty early on, we settled on that one also through the type of work that Bayer is doing within the Allotrope Foundation. But I would be very interested in hearing more about alternative data standards.
No. I guess the next one is kind of a bit more technical question from Will about how is the peak deconvolution implemented? I assume this is by Gaussian deconvolution. So
this is an algorithm called Parafac. It's been around for many years, but it's the first time, according to our knowledge, that it's been used for a 3D diode array data.
Okay.
And does it rely upon PDA detection to be effective? Yeah, so it is very important to have this this second dimension of data, this third dimension of data. So beside the retention time and the peak height, because the retention time can always shift, also to have your UV spectrum that you always acquire while you run the chromatogram. Right, this helps you greatly in for example, distinguishing chlorotoluene from cyanotoluene, right? Because sure, the retention time is different, but also the UV spectrum is kind of similar, right? But you can still distinguish it with these two levels of information.
Okay. I think in view of the time, we would stop the question there, although I have, like, as usual, 6,000 questions. So again, a virtual round of applause to Giulio for a very, very interesting talk.